No, it's not.
Great.
Just go green.
Okay.
Lisa, is it recording as a live stream?
The stroke was in May.
Yeah.
My whole pricing. This is
Good.
Washington.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Lauren.
You look great. Thank you. You really do. Yeah, come along. Okay.
Oh.
Wonderful.
Yeah, they usually die on.
It's
Because I never noticed.
Transcription.
Well, that's why we went on the show.
Yes, Shannon, I started the live stream.
No, you're not the way at all. Years. Review assistants for regional advisors.
That was, oh, I think maybe.
I mean, we've done it, we successfully done it, right?
Did you look at?
I didn't know it was mentioned last time, Ernest.
Was it in the?
I didn't see it.
Are we under regional advisors asking for enforcement? Yeah. One time we raised, I've been here too long, one time we raised someone.
No, they
So
were,
we're looking for people to.
I've been trying to get into it.
no, but the compensation was changed.
It's okay, it's through the process, I went through the process with you. I'm here.
It's really hot in this town.
Yeah.
Is it me?
I'm gonna keep it on.
It's really warm.
Well, I'm gonna mention it to the
You
board
mentioned that we're
members,
looking
right?
for, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Turn it down.
We're not recording it.
I want this first fit. Oh, I have a heavy bag I carry from my car.
No, for years.
3 years.
Feel like it has been outside.
It's not too bad, it was nice of you to come. It was like, I ran this morning at 4:34. I'm gonna talk on this too. Carolina. I said, all right. Carolina, we'll talk about that.
Well, I'll just.
Yeah.
If Buffalo can say something to make sure the audio is working,
Hi, I'm here.
thank you. And New York City, please.
You might be on mute.
New York City, you're on mute.
Can somebody in New York help?
Can, Victoria.
We'll get somebody in there. Can you, somebody call New York City and have them help?
I'll call her right now. Here comes Dave.
Who's that?
Yankees, go.
All right.
Wow. That'll wake you up. finish at 1.
We're ready whenever.
All right.
Oh, it's true. Never mind.
Right. One more. Lauren, Chanel Washington and Sue Baldwin are where? It's somewhere near Buffalo or New York?
The 2 new board
Two
members?
new board members?
Well, Chanel
New York
said she could
She
find
said she wasn't coming. I
Okay.
sent you an email, right?
for Chanel.
Yeah, and then I just said it.
And
Yeah.
then
Susan didn't say no or yet. Unresponsive. Yeah.
Syracuse-based office. All right. So should
So they're
I'll
not
just
here.
welcome them. I'm necessarily, maybe I won't go through the resumes.
Oh,
Considering that they're
okay.
not here.
There's only one resume.
Because I was told that you didn't need to welcome Chanel because she wasn't here. I'm sorry.
It's okay, it's not a problem at all.
Okay.
2, 3, 4. We have 4. Jeez, oh, no, 5. 1, 2, 3, and then 2 there, so 5. We have quorum.
Okay.
Based on 9.
Okay.
What's our full board numbers?
Full board is 9.
They have
Board
them
members,
listed.
board members.
Yeah,
Seven.
9, yep, 9.
5, 6.
but
Two vacancies.
How much is the quorum?
As long as we have 5, we're fine.
We just made it.
Thank you, Lauren.
I was wondering if I could somehow get, I resigned, but I won't do it
Shall we, y'all ready? You got complaints about starting? Okay, so I call to order the New York State Board of Real Estate Appraisers Thursday, August 3rd, 1 p.m. meeting. It is, I don't know, 102 maybe? 104. I would like to introduce and do roll call, please, starting with the members. In Albany, Steve Rufaro, Chair.
Carol DeSanto, Vice Chair.
Lillian Levy, and whatever
Buffalo,
Anthony Jerisol, member.
hello Anthony. New York,
Eliezer Rodriguez, board member.
hello, how are you guys down there?
Good,
and
thank you.
You're welcome. Go Mets.
No.
Records are so bad, I don't think we should compare. Okay. If you go around, we can go around the room in Albany and have staff introduce themselves.
Jody DeLallo, Department of State.
Emily Loopy, Department of State.
Allison Lacey, Department of State.
Shannon McGuire, Department of State.
Heidi Hicks, Department of State.
Lauren Gillespie, Department of State.
Jennifer Schwinger, Department of State.
John Golden, Department of State.
Any staff in Buffalo, Anthony?
No, I'm the only one here.
Okay. Any staff individuals in New York City?
Dave Mossberg, Department of State.
Hi, hello David, how are you?
Doing well. Hello.
Anyone in the public forum in Buffalo or New York?
No.
Public forum in Albany?
Rebecca Jones, certified appraiser, USCAP instructor, Binghamton, New York.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so I would like to welcome 2 new members, Chanel Washington, who has been excused from the meeting, and Sue Baldwin, who could not make it. I'd like to welcome them if they're listening on live stream, which if you're listening on live stream, I'm wondering what you're doing during the day. All right. In your packets, there is the meeting notes from the May 12th, 12/22. Yeah, they were also sent to you via email earlier in the month. If I can have a motion to accept the meeting notes. Can I have a second?
I want to make an amendment to the motion. In the line down, it's trained by supervisory for deputies instead of apprentices.
From where it's call to order.
In which section?
Oh, she's in section B,
Okay.
5 lines down.
On the minutes.
Should be what, trained
It
by?
should be, the fifth line down should be apprentice appraisers had been trained by supervisory.
Yep.
Or supervisors for
Yep.
decades.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Carol. Okay,
Minor.
that's okay, that would be clarified. All right, so Carol has made an adjustment to section B, Pyria, AQB presentations, 5th line, where it says apprentice, it should say supervisor. Supervisory?
Supervisor.
Supervisor. All right. With that being changed, can I have a motion to accept?
Yes.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So carried. Moving on to agenda item 2, department reports under enforcement. Ernest Delaney.
Ernest is not here. My name is Ernest, who's your board liaison with enforcement. He's on vacation this week.
Okay.
My name is John Goldman. I'm the acting chief investigator, so I'll be giving the enforcement report.
Thank you, John.
So the period, the window we looked at runs from June 1 of 22 through June 1 of this year. During that time period, there are 12 newly open cases that remain open to this day. It's a little bit of a caveat to that number. 47 cases were closed. 16 were referred for hearing, all based upon USPAP violations detected by our regional advisors. Of those 16, well, it may be, the hearings that actually occurred may be hearings that were referred prior to June of 22, but during that time period, there were 10 consent orders drafted between our legal department and the respondent appraiser, and 2 actual hearings held before administrative law judges, one was dismissed by the judge, the other resulted in the assessment of a $4,900 fine in lieu of suspension or revocation. Currently, there are 14 open cases, which I think is a marked difference from perhaps the last number that was on here. We've taken some internal steps to streamline our enforcement process, which I think is a reflection of that number. I think during the May meeting, the number is significantly higher than that in terms of what was open at that time. I was also asked to report that probably over the last several months, we've undertook a campaign to recruit new regional advisors, which we rely upon heavily to assist us in our enforcement efforts. And I'm happy to say that we succeeded. It's been a success thus far. We're still actively recruiting, but we've increased our RA roster from 12 to 18, and that's obviously a 50% increase in what our RA roster reflected prior to that campaign. But I was also asked to mention to the board members to pass the word that we are actively recruiting. This is Jenna Berschwinger. She's one of our deputy chief investigators. She's actually spearheading that effort. So Jenna, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about, but basically we've been spreading the word, with local boards, just asking that, they reach out to their members and let them know that if anyone's interested, anyone, because we're looking across the entire state, we need people, to just send us their resume and we'll reach out to them with next steps. We just kind of do a quick interview, make sure, they have the qualifications that we're looking for. And then if all sounds good, we just kind of have them fill out some paperwork and we send it to HR so they can do their thing. But we welcome as many people that are interested in working with us. Each case file, once the review is completed, it's a per diem flat rate of $600. So, it's not too shabby, whether it takes them a week, 3 weeks. But we do have tight time frames that we're working with, just because of the federal oversight. So that's just something that they would need to be aware of. And we would explain all of that to them if they inquired about, being interested to work with us. So, we're just looking for people to spread the word, because the more the merrier, really.
Are we light on any particular geographical region?
We might be, I'd have to look. I know we were light in the northern area, but I think I got quite a few this last round, so I'd have to kind of see where we're at.
So for market familiarity, we need to have RAs that are familiar with all different regions of the state.
John or Jenna, do we recommend that they send us a resume or?
Yep, they send us the resume.
Okay.
That's where I was gonna go with the question. So, and I guess this might be pointed toward Lauren or someone that proceeds to get stuff out to the board members. Maybe there's an email, a direct email address that we can give to people. Because sometimes, okay, if they can send your email address, and if we have somebody interested, we can send that to them, saying, forward your information to this individual. Because a lot of times, we kind of hit a block. Because we, as board members, don't have direct access to staff too much. So this way, if we had a email address, it would be easier to move things forward.
Sure.
Thanks. Carol?
And an entire staff directory of
Yeah,
management decisions would be.
I'm gonna get to that other business, I noted it actually. Okay, are there any questions of enforcement? Okay, thank you very much, very informative, appreciate that. Our next agenda item is processing report, Emily Luby.
So included in the materials you were provided, you'll find licensing statistics for May of 2022 and May of 2023. These reports show the number of real estate appraisers broken down by county and by class code or license type. The numbers are fairly consistent between the years.
So we're not seeing a drop off, right? Or are we seeing a drop off?
Pretty consistent.
No, they're
Yeah.
really very quite consistent.
Yeah.
Board members, any questions of Emily? Buffalo, New York, you guys got any questions?
No.
Thank you. Staff, questions? DOS workers? Did I say staff? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, all right, thank you, Emily, appreciate that. Our next agenda, excuse me, our next agenda item is 2C, continuing education audits. Allison Lacey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Beginning in April of 2023, the Bureau of Educational Standards has been auditing appraiser licensees for the required continuing education. Appraiser licensees are required to take 28 hours of continuing ed, which must include the most recent 7-hour USPAP update and a course on fair housing, fair lending. So far, we've audited 31 appraiser licensees. Out of the 31 auditees, 23 have complied. Out of the 8 remaining auditees, 5 are still within the time frame for them to respond. Are there any questions?
If there are any other questions, anybody, board members, questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Allison. We're moving on to agenda item 3, new business. USPAP update from David Mosberg.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So the new business item that was scheduled was in anticipation of possibly having the board consider and vote to adopt the upcoming USPAP update. Currently, the regulations provide that appraisers conducting appraisals have to follow the standards set forth in the 2020 to the 2021 edition of the USPAP. However, because of COVID, that edition had been extended and not changed. However, as we understand, there have been changes that are set to go into effect at the start of 2024. In New York, we update our statutes and our regs to conform to USPAP every time they make the change. However, we have not actually yet received the copy of the edition that will be in effect 2024 going forward. So I apologize, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to vote to make that change now. But at some point, as soon as we are able to get the upcoming edition of the USPAP, we'll need to schedule another meeting so that the board can vote to presumably accept the most up-to-date version of USPAP that appraisers will have to follow going in 2024. From historical practices, usually we did get a copy of the USPAP roughly around this time. Last time we did it, I think, was in 2019 for the preparation to the 2020 update. So it was just a timing thing. We haven't gotten it yet. So don't really have anything else to add on that, but if there are any questions from the board members, I'm happy to try to address them.
Board members, any questions for David?
I understand, David. I've read the draft that was approved, and it has not been made available to everyone yet. It's imperative that we have a fall meeting and that we have a quorum at the fall meeting in order to approve this for January 1st.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm thinking I don't know that it will be in effect based on the timing of the way the state regulatory process works to have it in effect by January 1, but I know that we're reaching out to the feds for a copy of the final version, and as soon as it's available, I believe Jody and I were trying to schedule a meeting to get back in front of everyone.
So Dave, let me ask, will there be an extension based on the time frame that they're putting us in?
Well, we're on a
I have an answer.
So, I mean, currently the state law and the state regulation will stay in place until it's amended. So the current regulation is section 1106.1 of Title 19 of the NYCR. That section makes specific reference to the 2020-2021 USPAP. So until that is modified, that will be what the appraisers will follow under our state regulation. And we can't change it until we get the actual version of the final, because we incorporate by reference the entirety of the USPAP. So while like USPAP says that they're supposed to be using the most current one, there's a potential conflict between the two.
Dave, would we have the opportunity, if the timing is right, to file it on an emergency basis so that it could become effective on filing?
So there's mixed case law on that. Generally, for an emergency filing, the state would have to establish that you couldn't follow the regular measures because of an emergent situation. Not being able to comply with federal law in some areas has been said not to be a sufficient enough emergency. So I don't know, and to my knowledge, we haven't really ever been in this position, because usually we have the updated USPAP by now when we have this meeting. But we can certainly, I mean, a regularly scheduled board meeting could be called just for the sole purposes of approving USPAP. Yeah. So in theory, like, as soon as we get it, if we could schedule a meeting, that's advisable.
Okay.
So let me reflect back. We're out of the COVID era, obviously. So the idea of having a FaceTime meeting or a video meeting or a Zoom meeting where we could cast votes, or I don't know if we could do it via a email out to the board members and then an electronic response. That falls outside the realm, correct? It would have to be a live meeting.
Yeah, it would have to be a meeting such as we're having today. At our last board meeting, that's reflected in the prior minutes actually, the board did vote to approve a new measure to allow some board members to participate remotely and under extraordinary circumstances. And like extraordinary circumstances would include like medical illness or some sort of unforeseen condition. But under the executive law, the 5 board members that are still required to constitute a quorum have to meet in a situation or a setting like we are today. So you'd still have to have, 5 members somewhere in Albany or Buffalo or all in New York City. And then other members who fall under the extraordinary circumstance could participate remotely.
Okay. All right.
So if the version of use app is available in October, we could call a meeting in October or November and pass it to be in effect.
I mean, it still won't be timely by then. There's a 90-day public comment period once the rule is published. So like, I mean, if we could get, and it's, the issue I think is the communication and receiving the documents first. On our end, I think we can move fairly quickly.
Would they allow us to approve it on review of the draft of it that was approved?
Unfortunately,
Official publication of it?
I mean, unfortunately, that won't specifically work for the New York regulation. The New York regulation, the way that it becomes adopted, is based on the final adopted rule. So in theory, like, I guess what you could do is you could have four extra meetings, right? You can have a rule, you can change the regulation to adopt the draft, right? And then come back and have that in effective on January 1. But that's not the final use PAP. That's only the draft of the use PAP. And then you'd have to come back and then amend the regulation again a second time, potentially.
Do we have to wait till after the public comment period for the vote?
Yeah.
No. So what we've done in past years was when we presented the adopted version of the use PAP that was approved by the feds, the board had made a motion to vote to approve the adoption of the use PAP and authorize the Secretary of State or designee to file any and all necessary paperwork to adopt it, provided there was nothing in the public comments. So we presented the 2020-2021 use PAP. There was a single vote, single approval, which was to adopt it and to file all the paperwork to get it done. And then we just waited the 90 days and filed the adoption.
But we need to have a meeting soon after it's made public so that you have the 90 days before January 1st?
Yeah.
Which means you would have to receive it before October 1st.
That's right.
Right, we have to vote on it prior to, because the 90 days from October 1st to the end of January, or the end of December.
I mean, it's actually a little bit tighter than that because there's technically a 4-week period on either end. So the way that the state register works is there's a filing deadline every Tuesday. So if we file paperwork today, Thursday, Friday, or Monday or Tuesday, it doesn't become published in the state register for 2 weeks. And then once it's published in the state register, that's when the 90-day comment period starts. Then you have to wait that 90 days to make sure that no one's going to object to it. And then you can file your adoption paperwork, but then that still takes 2 weeks to get published in the state register again.
So even if we waive the legislation or the requirements to adopt the draft, we would still be in the same time frame. Because by state law, you couldn't file that until the final accepted draft is out, correct?
We could not incorporate by reference the final version until we got it yet.
Yeah. So we'd be in the same timeline regardless of what we do.
Potentially, except you might have sort of like a Band-Aid measure, which is to say we're adopting the draft until the final goes into effect, but then you'd have to come back for an additional vote to undo the temporary measure.
So
We have 2 meetings instead of 1, so
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean,
It's later.
ideally, we just, and I know personally that, like, I had emailed to try to get a copy of the use PAP, and I know Director DeLallo has as well. So it's just an update that we have is that we do need to consider that we'll have to meet again in close time for the purposes of adopting the next version of the use PAP because this one is going to be changed, as I understand, January 2024.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So we have to vote on adopting use map every time they change it?
Yes.
And so can we just do a blanket that we adopt a use map?
No, because if they change like the text of it, then New York New York doesn't allow us to do that because we incorporate by reference, which means every time we adopt the use PAP, we actually adopt like all of the text, like in its entirety, and we have to make that available to the public. So if an appraiser, were to come to our office and say, I want a copy of the use PAP that I'm supposed to follow now in order to not violate the law, we have to give them a copy of it. So if we just say we adopt use PAP, then the appraisers presumably will, maybe in a position where they won't have a copy of use PAP and then, could potentially violate the law. So it's a unique part of the State Administrative Procedure Act that if they make a change, even if they make like a comma change or a grammar change, nothing substantive, if they make a change, we have to adopt it and incorporate it by reference, which is the same way that it's been done since they actually started doing the use PAP, and we've been incorporating it by reference.
Well, the last use PAP class I took, they talked about they're not going to just arbitrarily change it every 2 years anymore. They're going to, it's going to change when it needs to be changed. So we won't have to vote on it every 2 years. It might be 3 or 5 years, but that's in the future. They won't help us.
Hopefully this one will last for quite a while. But because they are making changes, at least on the drafts, they're certainly not ministerial or non-substantive. In order to comply with the New York State Administrative Procedure Act, we would have to incorporate it by reference, and the only way to do that is to actually have the final document that we're saying we're adopting as the state agency.
Okay, thank you.
Even if there are changes to the document, by New York State law, we would have to go through the same process every 2 years, correct, David?
If they change the use PAP, but if they never change the use PAP, then, so like hypothetically, if the next revision is going to be the use PAP effective January 1, 2024, if that was the only version of the use PAP in effect even until like 2030, like we wouldn't have to change the law again, because in 2030 we're going to still tell the appraisers you need to follow the 2024 edition.
It's only if it changes.
So it's a change.
Yeah, it's solely our action is based solely on federal action.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that very, very informative update.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's why we have meetings to get clarification. Are there any questions of board members to David on the use PAP topic? Staff? Director? Okay. Item B under new business, roles and responsibility of board members. Dave, you're not done. David, you're not done yet.
Yes, I know. Thank you. This is something that the department wanted to present to the board, particularly because this is the first meeting where we have our new board members present, and so sort of as an introduction, or at least virtually watching in. So one of the things that we try to do with our boards is to explain the purpose of the board, the roles of the board, and also to ensure that the board members are aware of their duties and those duties that are unique or distinct to the Department of State staff. And so this is just an opportunity for us to provide that background for the board members. So the board, as I'm sure everyone knows, is created by the New York State Executive Law. It's created specifically under Section 160-C of the Executive Law, which defines sort of the terms of office, how many people are appointed, how many times they're supposed to meet, what happens with vacancies, things like that. Section 160-D of the New York Executive Law actually provides a description of some of the board's powers and duties. And generally, the board's powers and duties include things like what we had just discussed in determining and developing the rules for the standards of practice, so adopting the use path or the scope of practice for appraisers. So, and again, it's with the caveat that basically whatever we do has to make sure that we don't fall below minimum federal guidelines for things. And so, for example, several years ago, we changed our regulations with respect to education and training to focus on discrimination and anti-bias. Before that was something that really became an issue across the nation, right? So we were allowed to do that because the board was allowed to establish types of educational experience and standards and all of those things, again, with the caveat that it doesn't fall below federal minimal standards. Things that, are potentially a conflict or a concern that we wanted to highlight was with respect to the department's roles with respect to enforcement of the executive law and Title 19. So while the board comes up and advises on the rules and standards, education, testing, things like that, the Department of State and Department of State staff is responsible for enforcement actions and enforcement investigations and discipline and disciplinary proceedings and all of that. And so it's always important that board members are aware that they should not intervene or attempt to intervene or even give the appearance of impropriety that they are involving, themselves in any sort of enforcement action. So if, as a board member, it's probably likely, maybe, depending on the region, where somebody may contact a board member and say, I just got this letter from the Department of State, what do I do? It looks like an enforcement thing that says there's a complaint. In those instances, because the board's functions is different than the department's functions, we really want to ensure that the board members know that really the advice should be, if you were contacted by the Department of State, respond accordingly, and do what respond to the Department of State. I can't help you. I'm a board member. I can't intervene. I can't be involved in this. This is solely a Department of State matter. And so sometimes that'll come up. I think, our usual types of cases, certainly as, was mentioned in the enforcement report and the audit report, are like if we get a complaint against an appraiser about like a quality of a report or something like that, or if we're doing a continuing education audit and we're just trying to ensure compliance, things like that. Just sort of a reminder that if in fact any board member is contacted, I think it's appropriate to respectfully decline, explain that I'm a board member, it's inappropriate to intervene or even give the appearance of intervening. If you got a communication from the Department of State, you should communicate with the Department of State or whoever sent that to you from the Department of State directly. So, that was just something that we wanted to highlight, as I said, particularly because we have new board members. And so we just think it's important to make sure that everyone's sort of aware of the different roles and duties between the board and, us as staff here. So I don't know if any board members have any specific questions or concerns, but that's really what we wanted to present or discuss.
Board members have questions?
No, I thank you for that very much. And I think it's very clear that we need to know that we're not enforcement, unlike a lot of other states, and it's totally separate. And I wonder if for new board members or maybe even existing board members, we could make a packet of the section of the law that explains that. Sort of an orientation. I think that a lot of us never had an orientation when we joined the board. We had to learn as we went along, and I think it's really important that we have something in place going forward so that it's totally understood what the role is.
So I think that's something that we should start doing as well. That's a great idea. So when we normally send a welcome email, I think, to the board members, right, Shannon? That can include roles and responsibilities.
I think it's
that would be helpful.
to be perfectly clear about what you're responsible and how to react to these situations, because the list of board members is public. So lots of times board members get calls, like David said, and you do refer them back, those of us that get them, refer them back to the Department of State. But we need to educate everybody from day one that this is
Yeah.
what they need.
Great idea.
Maybe even an illustration of a letter, like I forgot those, on enforcement, if you are under investigation, what the form letter might look like. So this way, when people call us and say, look, we don't do enforcement, follow the directions of the letter that you're getting, maybe even within the realm of that.
Letters are sometimes not always standard, you know, so.
But speaking points maybe too, it's not even official, it's just speaking points for a new member to refer.
Yeah, we can draft something up and send that for information.
And David, I appreciate that because we had spoken at length about this a few months ago, about the fact that some of the members were receiving phone calls and were, didn't know where to refer them to. And I always would say, whatever the directions within the state sending you things is what you need to. But thank you for reinforcing it because there was some confusion with some members.
Yeah, no, we're certainly happy to help, and certainly if, board members have questions, I think it's appropriate certainly to contact department staff for help and advice, so certainly feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Item C under section 3, Pararia update from Jody, Director of Law.
So I'll start, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'll start the conversation. I know Steve has some things to add and Carol will likely have some things to add. So as you know, there's an alternative method for upcoming appraisers to gain their experience. It's like a simulated experience. They've approved, I don't have the most up-to-date information, but I know that they do have programs that have been approved. I have known, no one's reached out to the department that I'm aware of, asking about what New York is doing with this, but I do know that the AQB is obviously recommending and encouraging that the states adopt Pararia fully. And I know that that's something that the subcommittee is working on, but so they do recommend that, and New York is anxious to adopt, whether fully or with recommendations from the board regarding additional requirements or a decision on what the board would recommend to the department. So I know there was a subcommittee established some time ago. I don't remember exactly when, and I remember having meetings where things were being tossed around, and I believe it was at the beginning stages. It was before any programs were approved. So I imagine now there's a lot more information for us to use to make decisions on what what we want to see in New York. So I expect that the subcommittee didn't meet within the last week.
No,
Okay.
actually, I asked for a meeting, but I never got a response.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
thought we should have one before, just prior to the board meeting, and
Yeah.
it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I'm not in a position to.
Yes.
To get it done.
Yes.
I think that there is, the information on the subcommittee, Steve, did you want to?
Yeah, so we discussed this as a subcommittee a number of times. So there were some things that were concerning to the subcommittee. Just to highlight a few. And then I think that I spoke to Jody about this, the fact that I think we need to get some information from the subcommittee to the board members and let them absorb that. Maybe some of the board members want to become subcommittee members and we can put you on the list. And then vote on a direction for this thing. I think we need to have a little more time in the essence as a board to educate ourselves to make a good reflection of this, because this is another pathway that people are accepting. There were some questions within the language of Pararia, and excuse me if I use the wrong acronym. Pararia. There are three required reports that were going to be reviewed. There was some concern about who was reviewing them, because in the pathways now, staff reviews those. Someone within the department of staff, some department of state reviews those. We make applications.
Yes.
For samples. So this is the same type of situation. We felt that 3 wasn't enough. That the language might have called for more.
Part of the subcommittee is a question to the State, when you ask to review a new applicant's work, how many appraisals do you require for review?
So Ernest is the one that's reviewing them. He's not at this meeting. I don't know how many samples he requests right now. But I don't know that that's separate. Well, it should be reasonable, and the AQB, whatever we are doing, the AQB is okay with it because
I know,
they do.
but that.
But if you're saying, right, so if.
That's minimal.
That's sort of a separate from,
Right.
are you talking about this to go hand in hand with Korea? Or is this a separate issue?
We can accept Korea as it is
Mhm.
from the AQB. That is a minimum requirement.
Mhm.
We can make requirements over and above
Correct.
what the
Yes.
minimum requirement
Yes.
is. We as a subcommittee feel that 3 reports of varied kinds of reports, they have to be 3 varied reports, may not be enough.
So that's what you're considering
Yes.
with
So
your subcommittee?
we're thinking that there needs to be a number of reports. We understand that they will be thoroughly researched and newspaper compliant. They have to be newspaper compliant reports. But how many do we want? We would like to see more.
Right.
We just don't think there is enough. The other thing that is an issue is the whole timeframe of this, and this is where our current law requires 24 months of appraisal experience. So we may have to go back to the New York State appraisal law, David, because when USPAP or when the AQB required only 12 months nationally, we did not approve that 12 months because it had to be a legislative action.
Or we could do it.
So this program is only 6 months. So the program, they will be done with in 6 months, pay a lot of money, get their experience credits, and then they wait out the rest 24 months. That's not helping us grow and diversify our people quick enough.
So there are certain points that the subcommittee wanted to bring up.
Right.
Probably the best way to go about it is to put something crafted briefly in writing, get it out to the board members, have the board members are gonna have to review the larger complex pathway that it is. And I talked to David at the same exact time we talked about enforcement. I mean, this isn't just housekeeping changes. We're gonna have to go out and do legislation because the timing framework, the 24-month waiting period for an appraiser in any of those other pathways is not what we have under law. If we're gonna change that, do we only change it for the pathway of Pereira, or do we change it for the pathways for everybody? So we gotta be consistent with what we're introducing based on what's already in legislation. I mean, there's other areas where there are definitions that we have now based on real estate appraisal law in New York State that, it's supervisory versus an instructor. There is no, this Pereira, whatever, I keep mispronouncing it, but the instructor, right now, based on New York State regulations, the application is so thin, they don't have to have any appraisal credibility to be an instructor. The definitions have to be separated, mentor. The definitions need to be separated and strengthened based on the pathway. So I think the easiest thing to do would have the subcommittee write a brief underline of where we are.
We need to change the definition of mentor in our law also, along with addressing the timeframe.
And the thing is that we need to look at, as we move forward, based on the recommendation, the board's gonna make a recommendation, and then it's gonna go to staff, and then it's gonna go to David, and David's gonna say, okay, based on the recommendations, these are the changes that we're gonna require in the law. That's not gonna be, and David correct me, it could be 12 months, 24 months, by the time we get the changes corrected or altered.
I think that's overly optimistic. My recollection is that there's also, in addition to like regulatory changes, so what we had discussed, for example, with like the USPAP, at a minimum, and USPAP updates are the simplest type of regulations we could do. Every time we've updated them, we've relied on a procedure called the consensus rulemaking. So it sort of shortens the rulemaking process or the paperwork that's required to do it. Something like this, I don't think would qualify as a consensus rulemaking. So at a minimum, you have the 90-day comment period, you have the 4 weeks on either end for publication, and then you also have all of the approvals of all of the documents that are going to go with the rulemaking. So that's just one aspect of it. The other part of it, as I recall, is that there would be necessary legislative changes that would be required. And so to do that, I mean, that requires an assembly bill, a Senate bill, they have to match up, and then they have to be sent to the governor for approval. So, you know, when you have to get them in session, has to get sponsored, has to get picked up. So I think 12 months is
Optimistic.
yeah, overly. I don't know how practical that is.
The other pathway is to have it sponsored out of the governor's office. Does that still require an assembly and a Senate representative? Okay.
Yep. So like even if we were to propose it, so I think what you're referring to is like a departmental.
Yes.
So a departmental bill is one which basically a state agency is given permission to sort of seek an elected official to sponsor or pick up the bill on our behalf. And it's usually like where there's something that the agency or the governor recognizes as critical, and there would be sort of significant ramifications if it weren't picked up. And so that is a possibility, but you still then need to get enough senators and enough assembly people to vote to pass it, to give it back to the governor to sign into law.
All right.
I have some questions
Sure.
for you guys. So, actually, Dave, this is a question for you. Sorry to put you on the spot, putting you on the spot. But if the board's recommendation is to adopt para-RIA, just that's it, adopt para-RIA without the changing the statute related to the minimum months of experience. Is that a statutory change as well, or could that be a regulatory change?
To be honest, I don't remember offhand.
Okay, that's fine.
I think that my vague recollection, and obviously I'll go back and review it, is that any of them would require statutory change because there are like the definition sections in Article 6E of the executive law. So like just to comply by changing the definitions of things like experience to include this other form, like I would anticipate that we would need some sort of change.
Okay,
So
all right.
My quick answer is I think so, but.
Yes, okay, that's good enough for now, because we're gonna internally, so this is what I would recommend. So the subcommittee to me and kind of point to your recommendations. Like you said, Steve, we're gonna have to review it internal.
Right.
Let's assume the board votes that they approve the recommendations. It still Dave would still have to determine what needs to be changed, and we'd have to determine how we would have to implement. So I would recommend that you make the points that you're recommending, share it with the board. In the meantime, I discussed with Whitney this morning that we will be meeting internally with Dave as well to kind of develop our recommendations as well. And, depending on the timing of it, we could share with the board as well to get comments from you. Simultaneously, the subcommittee working on recommendations, but I mean, I do know that the AQB does encourage adopting it, and I think the department could definitely, I know you're heavily involved, so I know that that's the ideal situation.
It's just that, these few tweaks.
Yes.
It's unique in
Yes.
what we think that is best for our state,
But here's the thing. So here's a comment, concern, question I want to take. I go back to the numbers that we're seeing year to year, every quarter. We haven't had it fall off. I understand the process of inclusion, but in the essence of an occupational perspective, the staff versus demand, or the occupation versus demand seems to be level. So I can see the urgency of passing it, but this is my own personal concern. I don't want the thing watered down so much that 3 years down the road, across my desk starts foreclosure, March. And then I have, no offense, and it could be publicly said, then I'm hearing from elected officials as to why the occupation has allowed it to go where it's gone. And my response is gonna be, because you made a move without recommendations to put something together, good intentions as it was, is now causing to be where we are. So there's a balance of urgency versus let's put something out. And I'll say this, and this is of my own, I'm not promoting within, but we've gone from, I remember in 1994 or 1999 to them coming in and saying, what are you doing? To 2015, them saying, hey, we'd like to see what you're doing. Based on those recommendations, based on when Virginia was here with the reviews, I'd like to continue that kind of language coming from the federal agencies that oversee us. So my personal concern is that, yes, we need to move it forward. We have been moving it forward. I just don't want to move it so quickly that 3 or 5 years down the road, we have lending issues. We have foreclosure issues, and things of that effect.
Understood. Yeah. So, yes, so I would encourage to make your, to meet and make your recommendations. And even if it's not tied up in a neat little bow, we could see where you want to head, and that would help us with our internal.
Yeah, and I think it would work, it would probably work quickly, or more quickly in that regards than working
And also
like
address
this.
our concerns about being involved with.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Like jumping into questions. I can't do whatever I want, let's stay with the meeting. Okay, any other questions, any comments, Jody, concerns?
I also
Carol?
want to bring something up under new business. The AQB also just passed an amendment for a new course that New York, it really follows pretty much the New York law, that we were the first state to pass on fair housing, fair lending. They do, for the 7-hour qualifying course, will require an exam. I don't know if you got the word on that or not yet, Allison.
I have.
It's just passed. So it's not gonna be effective immediately, but we are going to have to adjust our law to that, to pick up the little bit of differences. Of course, it's similar that we passed. I advocated for this on a federal level, so it's really important that we tweak our law, but it's not immediate.
2026.
Yes, that's what we thought. Originally it was 25, but we
went back and.
Yeah, they had to have more than one version.
Yeah.
And I just wanted everybody aware that that's coming. Okay.
Do you have a copy of that? Could you share
Yes,
it
I
with
do.
us? All right, because, I mean,
Oh.
we could always,
I say with
Because we-
question mark.
I got it.
Yes.
I have it, Dave.
I think it
Okay.
actually may be on the Appraisal Foundation website.
Okay.
I think you can get a copy officially from there, and also for the, there may even be a new the draft to read.
There's opinion statements, I think, and but the actual text is not available.
Okay. Let me ask the question whether I could share that.
Okay.
It's been passed, I would imagine that I can, but
We haven't used that.
yeah.
Right.
For you to do your eyes on the differences, is important, but we've got plenty of time.
I had some new business.
Yes,
Is
Mr.
it-
Jaroslaw.
So, I had sent out an email to the board members, about a bill that I became aware of. It's HR 2771. It's the appraisal modernization bill. And I didn't know if you were all aware, I didn't know if you were aware of this. So I signed up to get, to be notified of changes to this bill. And would be a federal law modernizing how appraisers are registered and licensed. So, and it keeps getting more co-sponsors. So I just wanted you to know about it, that's something that might be coming down the pike.
277, that's a federal bill, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What was the number on it?
HR 2771.
H27?
HR.
HR 2771. So if you go to the Congress website, you can look up the law, and I signed up for email notices about it, and I just thought you might want to be aware of it.
7 times.
I wasn't aware of it. I haven't been following it up, so I don't know.
We'll have to look into it, Anthony. I did get the email from you.
All right, it's just something that I thought you should know about.
Okay.
And I had one other thing, and I'm not sure exactly how to do this. So I've been approached by several new appraisers that are the people that want to be appraisers and trainees, and they were asking about whether the state could grant any kind of some kind of would help them with their process of becoming licensed or becoming assistants. They feel like during COVID, they kind of got stalled in their process, and so if they were accumulating education, for instance, so now they kind of lost a couple years. So now they expressed concern that education that they had was going to not qualify any longer. It was going to be too old when they went to apply because it would be past the 5-year deadline. And then the assistants that I talked to said that during COVID they had problems getting experience. So they for whatever reason they couldn't get. They felt like they couldn't get the experience that they needed to apply to get their license. And
Are you speaking about the fact during COVID they lost a certain amount of time to get education and experience?
Exactly. Right. So I didn't know if we could give them some relief, like like other sections of the world got relief. Student loan payments were paused, mortgage payments were paused. Different areas have gotten relief because COVID, affected their lives, and I didn't know if this is something that we could do or we could consider. I wasn't sure how it would work. But if I want to, we're talking about encouraging people to become appraisers, and these are people that want to be appraisers. They've already started down the path, but now they feel like they've been set back by COVID, and I thought this would be a way to help them along.
So I can speak to that.
Director?
If you want me to. So it really depends on which component of licensure that they're not meeting. Because there's education, like for an appraiser assistant, it's an AQB requirement that those courses are only valid for 5 years. It really depends on how they're applying, what type of license they're applying for, and which component. Because the experience requirements of 24 months, that's a minimum requirement. It's not a maximum requirement. Although we have the board some years ago passed a regulation that says experience is only valid for 5 years. So if it really depends on what they're talking about. If they're talking about they couldn't get their experience in that 5 years, then that's one of our regulations, and I would expect that we have to follow that. If there's a special individual circumstance, I would think we'd have to look at that on an individual basis. The AQB requirement for the appraiser courses, we have to follow their guidelines. They did allow extensions for certain things during COVID. The AQB even allowed, Shannon, put you on the spot. I think it was maybe for education, they allowed certain distance learning courses because there were courses that, or I should say Allison, right, there were courses that people couldn't take coursework, so the AQB allowed them to take online courses that would otherwise live distance learning, they allowed that. So there were some considerations for people having a hard time during COVID. So when you're talking about this in a general way, I really have to see each person's specific issue.
Okay.
I know, we're not gonna talk about it now, but,
Right.
you and I can probably email on this issue if you have particulars, and we can reach out if you have a particular person.
Because I have one person in particular that's emailed me a few times, and I told her I'd ask and see, what we could do. So I could forward I could forward you her email.
Yes.
And see if she could get some kind of, if there was a way that, that she could get, if the education was a little too old or something, you could make accommodation for it.
Yeah, it depends what it is, and because everyone has different courses that they took and different timeframes, and so we'd have to look at each individual's person to see if there's anything we do. We have to obviously follow the AQB criteria, but if there's something on our end that we already have leeway on that's not set in statute, then there's things we may be able to do. And even if, we may have guidance we could share, the best pathway for them to follow from where they are.
Okay.
Either way, we can assist.
And who should they contact?
Why don't you give me the person's information and I'll have somebody reach out to them? Why don't you
Okay.
email me or email Lauren, and she can share the information and we can reach out to them and handle it.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
As a board, we have shifted. I mean, when people were coming and saying they couldn't get the courses weren't offered, we extended the long distance learning to include that at one point. And the 5 years was something we adopted originally when the standards were set up. I don't think we've ever wavered off that. The 5-year educational time frame that you could take classes. That was
that's AQB, isn't it? I mean, that's
right, but that was the original. Yeah, but that was the original advisory opinion. We adopted that. We've never wavered off of that. We've never shrank it or expanded it. It's always been that 5-year framework for anybody that applies.
For the experience. But that was a board rule. That's not an AQB rule. That's a board rule. The 5 years for the trainee courses, that's an AQB rule. So, I mean, if that's something that the board wants to consider changing, I mean, that's something that, you can explore.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much.
All right. Does anybody else have any other new business? Recommendation for a new meeting before we go to public comment. Lauren has suggested that we meet on November 16th. We can put that as an official date. The possibility of changes, we have to meet earlier to adopt USPAP. Okay, so board members in New York and Buffalo, do we have any regards or comments about the possibility of November 16th date for our next meeting?
I think that's fine with me.
New York?
Checking now.
Tell David to stop checking the Mets score on his phone.
I'm actually emailing the rule on that 5-year thing.
I'm only teasing David. I have to have some levity during the meeting.
Jody's phone is going to beep in a second.
I forgot it.
All right, so our next meeting will be scheduled for November 16th, except we have to make an alteration because of USPAP. At this point, item number 4 would be public comment period. Is there anybody in Buffalo or New York for public comment? Is there anybody in Albany? Rebecca,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Rebecca Jones, Binghamton, New York. Just a couple of things to comment on. And Jody, I apologize. I'm back here going, I have the use PAP, and it's not the draft. So I have an email that's coming to you as soon as I'm done. I'll hit send because as a use PAP instructor and course creator, and when you look at the rules of the foundation, it comes out October 1st because they train us instructors. But we're permitted to use this in our course creation. So this is the final, it's not gonna change.
Great.
Yes, I'm like, I have it. That's why I was being so disruptive. I apologize. I'm the source for resources here. The other thing too, just with the pyorrhea, because I'm working on that group, we've had 7 meetings. So we've got like nuggets that we know that need to be done. The last item I have, I've been getting a lot of calls from other appraisers that are chief appraisers within appraisal management companies all over the United States. They're very frustrated of the response coming from New York State and trying to get the renewal for their AMC registries. So I'm hoping we could either get them an email address or something. One of them I actually sent over the credit card form that I know that you guys use and said, well, here's a way to pay it. And that at least helped with the timeline. But that's been an issue in New York State is the appraisal management companies being able to register or even renew their registry for the AMCs site. And I know it's newer. And I, pitch the good old New York State and say, just give us a little patience and grace and all of that. But I told him I'd bring that information here to see if we could fix that glitch or process.
Okay.
And that's all I've got.
All right,
That's not enough.
I have actually just a closing comment, because we talked about a lot of organizational things. Is there a possibility that, just for board members only, that we can get a list of, it's going to be lengthy, of the 3 or 4 people that if we did have questions on a department process, would you direct everything to you? Okay, easy enough. So Jody's gonna send out her email address. All right. Okay, good meeting, full of a lot of good stuff. Carol's town.
Opening up Syracuse office for.
Yeah, we already talked about
Steve's
that.
already put that
I've
in my
already-
ear.
Okay.
I've already said that a few
Yeah.
times.
Let me look into it. I honestly don't know, what's possible and what's not.
We realize that I love coming here and seeing everything, but
Yeah.
it's convenience.
Yes, yes.
For so many of us.
I'll look into it. I don't know what that looks like, to be honest. Really, I know we don't have space, but maybe there's shared space similar to what we do in Rochester. I don't know. I don't even want to give you false,
Yeah.
hope
Yeah.
or the other way around. So I will get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, concerns, comments for the New York State Board of Real Estate Appraisers, I would call for an adjournment of the August 3rd meeting, 2023. I think you guys have blown through my 45-minute, you're completely blown through that. I'm only out in 45 minutes, but I can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, New York. Go Mets.
Didn't hear that.
Now you can say it.
Go Yankees.
Yeah, go Yankees, yeah. Are they still over 500?
I'll see you guys.